Welcome to the Only Male Cruz show, the We On Your Head podcast. Discussing topics that make you say, how and where can we improve as a society? From a Black American's perspective. Copyright disclaimer regarding fair use is in full effect. The views and opinions expressed in this show, you guessed it, they're all mine. Catch us live, be ready to speak. This is a call-in show. Be sure to hit the like button, share, subscribe, replay gang, leave a comment. You know I want to hear from you. Let's go to work. Okay, so welcome to the Only Male Cruz show, the podcast, We On Your Head podcast. I had the mic on mute, didn't realize. I'm live on Twitter, live on YouTube. Guess how many people are in the audience right now? 0. But that's okay. The show must go on. This is such an important topic because it's adding context to what we already know. We're discussing the new Jim Crow written by Michelle Alexander, and we are actually going to delve into, in this section, still chapter 1, by the way, but we're going to delve into the sub chapter of the death of Jim Crow. And just to refresh the memory, back in the 70s, mid-70s, leading criminologists thought that prisons, they actually recommended that prisons be on their way out. And I believe that the war on drugs, this crack war back in the 80s, was as soon as criminologists determined that prisons were on the way out. And the reason why they determined that they were on the way out, because people had good paying jobs. And so there was no inclination. There was no desire to break the law. It didn't matter what the penalty was. They're making and earning good wages. So, you know what I'm saying? Break the law for what? You understand? So I think the government did their thing and said, hey, you know what? We got to make sure that these prisons become revitalized. When I was reading this book earlier this week, and I was reflecting on the prison situation, I'm wondering how many politicians, former politicians or former lobbyists, got involved in the privatization of prisons. Because if in the 70s they were saying, hey, this prison stuff, we don't need that. Prisons and juvenile institutions, according to these leading criminologists, don't do anything but create more criminals. And so the recommendation was get rid of the prisons. How many politicians are associated with the private prisons? That's something I'd like to know. So at any time, if anyone knows the answer to that, then by all means, please share, put it in the comments. So we're going to get right to it. Shout out to the folks in the bushes. Sure do appreciate you. But let's get right into it. The death of Jim Crow. Now, of course, we are in the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness, written by Michelle Alexander. And we're in chapter 1, and we're in the subchapter, The Death of Jim Crow. Scholars have long debated the beginning and end of Reconstruction, as well as exactly when Jim Crow ended and the Civil Rights Movement, or the Second Reconstruction, began. Reconstruction is most typically described as stretching from 1863, when the North freed slaves, in 1877, when it abandoned them and withdrew federal troops from the South. There is much less certainty regarding the beginning of, of the end of Jim Crow. The general public typically traces the death of Jim Crow to Brown versus Board of Education, although the institution was showing signs of weakness years before. By 1945, a growing number of whites in the North had concluded that the Jim Crow system would have to be modified, if not entirely overthrown. The consensus was due to a number of factors, including the increased political power of blacks due to migration to the North and the growing membership and influence of the NAACP. Now, that's so interesting because the NAACP has a reputation of really not putting in no work, at least in the present day. They talk a good game, but can you recall most recent time when the NAACP has scored a win for Black Americans? And they get in it, they get involved in the situation, but somehow, when it's all said and done, um, it doesn't turn out as a win for Black Americans. And you can take the situation in Mason, Tennessee, as a prime example of them not winning. Shout out to Brother Muko in the Twitter space. Brother Muko, if you can put 100 or something like that up in the air to let me know that you can hear me, and I would love to send you a microphone. So put another 100 up if you can pull up and co-host with me, because I would. Yeah, Brother Muko in the house. Y'all stand fast with me here in these YouTube streets, and let's get Brother Muko on here. Brother Muko got a situation going on with the. Um, let's see, he's got a situation going on with. Hi, Brother Muko.
Mm.
How you
Hey,
doing?
sis, what's
Hey,
going on?
hard work,
Thank
sweetheart.
you for having this space again.
Yes, thank you for
Can you hear
pulling
me
up.
loud and clear?
I certainly can. I certainly can. And I'm just going to tell you, it looks like Sunday is going to be the day that we do this book club, because through the week, I got a lot of stuff going on. And through the week, it's kind of hard to be consistent. I don't want to, stretch the time. So for the replay gang and the people that's in the mix right
Right.
now, yeah, Sundays looks like it's it. But I want to deviate from this book discussion piece right now, because Brother Muko, you had just recently posted something, which I responded to you in one of the chats. I called it Henrietta Lacks 2.0. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, absolutely. You're talking about the digging up of Wilhelmina Lancaster.
Yeah, can you give like just a brief overview? Because we need to be on that. Now, what happened there?
Wilhelmina Lancaster was a sister, and she was uh, she was a sister during the time of when racism was really prevalent.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was, I forget the organization, but she was a Catholic. She was a Catholic church priest. Nun. And what happened was they buried this sister, and later on, this week they dig up her remains, and they're so surprised at how intact her body is, and the like the least amount of uh
Decomposition.
decomposition and
Hmm.
all. And
Hmm.
so they were just they put her on display.
Wow.
And now they want to raise her to sainthood,
Hmm.
like that's some type of achievement or something.
Hmm.
And they have her body on display. So you got white people coming, just looking at her body, wanting to take pieces of something home with them. So they're taking some of the burial dirt. As you can see in the article, you see white hands rubbing her decomposed hands. I posted a book with our sanctuary attached to that article, because this is what we're seeing right now is the display of black dead bodies. and the selling of them and the trafficking of our organs
Mm,
put on display
mm.
like this is a normal thing.
Right.
This is something to do.
Right.
And it was pretty disgusting when I seen it, pretty disgusting when I heard the news clip. And I just wanted to bring it to the Care Unit's family because this is what's happening to us today. We just
Right.
had the director of the morgue at Harvard arrested, but he was only given 10 years.
Hmm.
You know, you had a white woman before this got caught uh, selling and trafficking over 520 dead bodies. And this woman only got 20 years.
Hmm.
Like,
Wasn't
it's,
wasn't
it's
that
really,
what wasn't that
sad,
lady
sad,
out a
but
police officer or something like that in Florida? Is that the same story?
no,
Okay.
I posted that up and I put it in the Jumbotron as
Okay.
well.
Perfect.
But this lady was a director of a funeral home.
Mm, mm,
Okay,
mm.
so there's no telling, and I just cannot see for the life of me white people selling white bodies.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's been a sport of
Mm,
lynching us. It's
mm,
been a sport of barbecuing and cooking out of us, of
mhm,
our black dead bodies. Um, and this is the time where we need to stop implementing that same sadistic ritual of
mm,
cooking out and barbecuing
mm.
and understanding where it came from
Yeah.
and just upgrading our thoughts, speech, and action. You know,
Absolutely.
we can no longer use the same degenerate terms that
Mm.
these people use to kill us
Right.
and then turn it around and say, oh, well, it means something different for me.
Mm.
No, you know,
Right.
so I just wanted to put that out. I'm glad you even brought that up because
Yeah.
we're at the liquor store. I'm currently doing a weekly broadcast,
Right.
and it's called People's Activity,
Yeah.
Thought, Speech, and Action.
Yeah.
And we will be covering on my broadcast many various different things
Sure
like
enough.
this, dealing and pertaining to racism, white supremacy, the
Awesome.
victims of it,
Right.
and the perpetuators of it.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
thank you for just bringing this point up.
Yeah.
And also, me and Governor are going to be doing one, one, I think the first or last Tuesday of the month, we're doing a segment on black men, just black men,
Awesome.
our faults, our geniuses, and upgrading and codifying black men.
Right.
You know,
Awesome. And y'all
so
y'all doing
that's
that in the
something
liquor
that's coming down
store?
the pipe.
Y'all doing that in the liquor store
Yeah,
on
at the
Twitter?
liquor store, we're doing that. We're doing the men talk once a month, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably it's going to be the first Tuesday. I think that's what we agreed on.
Mm-hmm.
And my broadcast is going to be starting this week coming. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be every Thursday, and I'm going to be holding it every Thursday at about 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be called, and the name of my broadcast is People Activity.
Awesome. That's
People
awesome.
Activity, Thought, Speech, and Action.
And that's
Yep.
unfunded socially and Twitter. Is that correct? And YouTube?
Yes, actually, I will be broadcasting every week live off of social. I
Perfect.
will not be doing it for Twitter or now. I might have a Twitter attached to it, but
Sure.
we're going to be live on social.
Awesome. Awesome. Funded socially. Okay. Well, thanks for that update because, yeah, that's something to watch and definitely something to, something to stay on top of. So, okay. So back to, um, back to the new Jim Crow written by Michelle Alexander. And we're in the subchapter, The Death of Jim Crow. And of course, as I just indicated, the general public typically traces the death of Jim Crow to Brown versus Board of Education. And it says here, although the institution was showing signs of weakness before, by 1945, a growing number of whites in the North had concluded that the Jim Crow system would have to be modified, if not entirely overthrown. The consensus was due to a number of factors, including the increased political power of blacks due to migration to the North and the growing membership and influence of the NAACP, particularly its highly successful legal campaign challenging Jim Crow laws in federal courts. So I guess that we can say was a win for the NAACP, but I challenge anyone else to pull up to the bumper with another win that Jim Crow or that the NAACP actually accomplished for Black Americans. Shout out to Baby Shay. Y'all do like Baby Shay say. Do like she say. Hit the like button, share, and subscribe. Shout out to Tatiana Harris, and shout out to the Bushes on YouTube. All right, so let's keep it moving. We are now going to talk about, says here that far more important in the view of many scholars, however, is the influence of World War II. The blatant contradiction between the country's opposition to the crimes of the Third Reich against European Jews and the continued existence of a racial caste system in the United States was proving embarrassing, severely damaging the nation's credibility as leader of the free world. There was also increased concern that without greater equality for African Americans, Blacks would become susceptible to communist influence, given Russia's commitment to both racial and economic equality. In Gunnar Myrdal's highly influential book, An American Dilemma, published in 1944, Myrdal made a passionate plea for integration based on the theory that the inherent contradiction between the American creed of freedom and the equality and the treatment of African Americans was not only immoral and profoundly unjust, but was also against the economic and foreign policy interests of the United States. And that is true. And I think I mentioned this before in the previous space where I think it was Wells Fargo Bank. They did a study and said that America lost out on like $21 billion just simply due to racism. And that occurred because they failed to give mortgages to Black Americans. They failed to give business loans to Black Americans. By giving business loans to Black Americans, that meant that we would have to do business, or we could do business with other ethnic individuals who have their own businesses. So now we become their customers and they become ours. And what? Both entities are paying taxes, generating revenue, which employing people, which means they're going out and they're buying them from other people. So simply due to racism and withholding and preventing Black Americans from even getting in the game, America really cut its own nose off to spite its face by failing to allow us as Black Americans to open businesses and own property, commercial and or residential. So keeping it moving, the Supreme Court seemed to agree in 1944 in Smith versus Allwright. The Supreme Court ended the use of the all-white primary election, and in 1946 the court ruled that state laws requiring segregation on interstate buses were unconstitutional. 2 years later, the court voided any real estate agreements that racially discriminated against purchases, and in 1949, the court ruled that Texas segregated law school for Blacks was inherently unequal and inferior in every aspect to its law, in every respect to its law school for whites. So in 1950, in McLaurin versus Oklahoma, it declared that Oklahoma had to desegregate its law school. Thus, even before Brown, the Supreme Court had already begun to set in motion a striking pattern of desegregation. And it's so funny because we just heard from our favorite Uncle Festus, Clarence Thomas, where they took affirmative action and they said, nah, y'all don't need that. Y'all don't need that. Y'all be all right. But see, to me, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Brother Muko, but to me, I bet you if you took a real live census, I bet you it's a whole lot of Asians that really, they weren't tripping on affirmative action for Black people. I think that this act was another piece or another implementation of that racial bribe, of that racial division, so that Asians and Black Americans wouldn't go to school and be all right with it, like they've done in the past. So,
I mean, big facts, Mel. And
mhm,
I want to add to what you're saying. This is what Martin Luther King
mhm,
Jr. was assassinated for, because he revealed that that economic law which you are describing right there,
Hmm.
they provided the economic floor for all these foreigners and still doing it today.
Yeah.
You know, with the illegal documented people that,
Yeah.
I mean, the undocumented people that are here, they
Hmm.
are providing the economic floor for them,
Hmm.
giving them checks every month,
Yeah.
giving them a place to stay, even giving them court papers for citizenship dated 2 to 3 years down the line.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
this is providing not just the economic floor for them, an
Hmm.
economic floor, a social floor, platform, and a goddamn killing ground where they are providing them with weapons and money.
And
Okay, I'm
badges
gonna repeat that.
and badges in
Right, and
Chicago.
badges.
Mm.
That's right,
Mm.
and badges. And once it starts in Chicago, guess what? You're going to see illegal documented police officers in Baltimore, New York, D.C., California, and it's just going to spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now what we have is an open market
Mm.
for assassination. This
Wow.
is what we have.
Wow.
Okay, it's an open market assassination now. And you can go on. I just wanted to add that point to that because
Yeah.
you are definitely on point.
Yeah, sanction killing of black folks by undocumented folks by giving them authorization to become police and giving them financial stability so that they can go to work every day just to do the job that the folks been trying to do since they forcibly brought us over here to this country. Lord, have mercy. All right, Brown versus Board of Education was unique. However, it signaled the end of home rule in the South with respect to racial affairs. Earlier discussions had chipped away at the separate but equal doctrine, yet Jim Crow had managed to adapt to the changing legal environment, and most Southerners had remained confident that the institution would survive. Brown threatened not only to abolish segregation in public schools, but also, by implication, the entire system of legalized discrimination in the South. After more than 50 years of nearly complete deference to Southern states, the non interference in their racial affairs, Brown suggested a reversal in course. Shout out to Prime in the Twitter space. Shout out. Request a mic at any time. Shout out to Shrinking Sharon on the YouTube streets. Hey, if you're on YouTube and you want to come up on the panel and chime in on this conversation, somebody say drop the link and I'll put it in the chat. And if somebody, Prime or Brother Moko, if one of y'all can put the YouTube channel, I got it attached somewhere, y'all. If y'all can put it in the Jumbotron, that would be great. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Um, so I got to read this sentence again. After more than 50 years of nearly complete deference to Southern states and non interference in their racial affairs, Brown suggested a reversal
Wow.
in court. That's a trip. And that's that word deference, meaning see no evil, hear no evil. Let it go, let it be whatever it is. Nobody, they just let the South do what they wanted to do. But then when this Brown versus Board of Education came into play, the South had to say, oh, snap. Uh, we might have to do things differently now. A mood of outrage and defiance swept the South, not unlike the reaction to emancipation and Reconstruction following the Civil War. Again, racial equality was being forced upon the South by the federal government, and by 1956, Southern white opposition to desegregation mushroomed into a vicious backlash. In Congress, North Carolina Senator Sam Ervin Jr. drafted a racist polemic, the Southern Manifesto, which vowed to fight to maintain Jim Crow by all legal means. Ervin succeeded in obtaining the support of 101 out of 128 members of Congress from the 11 original Confederate states. A fresh wave of white terror was hurled at those who supported the dismantling of Jim Crow. White citizens' councils were formed in almost every southern city and backwater town, comprised primarily of middle to upper class, middle white class whites in business and the clergy. Let me read that statement again because that didn't flow too smooth, and that is important. So A fresh wave of white terror was hurled at those who supported the dismantling of Jim Crow. White citizens' councils were formed in almost every southern city and backwater town. These councils were comprised primarily of middle to upper middle class whites in business and the clergy. Just as southern legislatures had passed the black codes in response to the early steps of Reconstruction in the years immediately following Brown versus Board, 5 Southern legislators passed nearly 50 new Jim Crow laws. So we got Brown versus Board saying, hey, you can no longer be legally be prejudiced, operate racistly. And so when that happened, they said, "Oh shoot, we're gonna have to strengthen up some Jim Crow, create some Jim Crow, and make Jim Crow do what it do." Every time we take two
Right.
steps, yeah, we take 2 steps, and they take 10. Whew, Lord,
Right. And you said
mm-hmm,
earlier last week, we made it a point to point out the way that these laws were implemented, and these
mm-hmm,
laws are just not, they're blanketed as, Jim Crow or black codes, but what they actually did is once it was passed that you cannot openly be prejudiced,
mm-hmm,
what they started doing was creating these vagrant laws,
mm-hmm.
these laws that you would be arrested when you didn't have a job. If
Yes.
we pay attention to the movie Life, with Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence and Bernie Mac and all those people in it, all of those black men that were locked up, okay? He only
Mm-hmm,
asked a few, what are you in here for? Only a few said murder,
mm,
okay? But everybody else was charged up on some not being employed
mm,
or,
yeah.
just simply being black.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This cannot be passed over and glossed over because this is the same situation that's going on today
Yeah.
with undocumented people.
Well.
Okay?
Well.
The same undocumented with that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and you're making such a great point, Brother Mook. Go. Now, let me ask you this. Does what happened in Chicago, where they immediately arrested that woman and her son and didn't even consider the entire circumstance that the man initiated the action against her when he hit her, and then she went and told her son go out there and get the 2A, but they immediately arrested her. That sounds to me like that's comparable to what you just described, where in that movie Life, and even though that's not a true story, but the reality of it, there's a reality of that. Would you agree that is similar to that?
It's similar and disheartening in a lot of ways.
Mm,
And I'm gonna say this to add to what you just said is this: when we are, and I'm saying this because I'm a registered gun owner and I'm a concealed license holder,
mm-hmm,
and I'm gonna tell you this: this is the first thing they even told me. I went to a black training school, and they told me, they said, "Look, brother, you need to have this $2 million worth of insurance." I
mm-hmm,
said, 2 million for what? He said, because this is what they don't tell you. Even if you murder someone in self-defense, even if it's in a place like Florida, will stand your ground.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah,
Even if it's in a place like Chicago with
mm-hmm,
self-defense. Because see, in Maryland, we don't have self-defense laws.
mm,
You will be arrested. Okay?
wow,
You will be arrested. Now, white people is something different.
mm-hmm,
Okay, and this is the disjustice, all right, folks?
yes,
This is the disjustice, and this is why I say nothing has changed
mm,
since then. See, they can kill us with impunity. Impunity means we don't get locked up,
yeah,
we get questioned and sent back home.
mm,
In some cases, we don't even get questioned,
mm-hmm,
okay?
mm-hmm,
And a lot of these cases, when we don't follow them through, they end up in manslaughter or
mm-hmm,
assault charges,
mm-hmm,
which are misdemeanors.
mm-hmm,
Not manslaughter, but, it's not a murder.
yeah,
So with this, what you're seeing right now is a rendition
mm,
of the black codes
mm,
without it being labeled black
come
codes.
on, codes by
Okay,
another
you
name.
might as well you and the lady and the son who I still feel for, for the son
Absolutely,
and his 2 daughters
yeah,
that he left
the
behind.
whole
But
situation.
just like I said in the chat, the more I find out about the story, the worse it gets.
Mm,
The worse it gets for the people involved.
right,
You
right,
know.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
Yeah, I would say it's definitely similar.
yeah.
Yes.
Now let me jump in here too, because I just mentioned I had mentioned that North Carolina Senator Sam Ervin, who drafted a racist polemic called the Southern Manifesto, which vowed to fight to maintain Jim Crow by all legal means. And shout out to Tatiana Harris, who put in the YouTube chat. One of those was Senator Byrd, who was Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's mentor. Is it any
Big
shock?
fact.
Whoa. Oh my
Big
goodness.
fact.
Oh my goodness. Jim Crow is still alive and kicking. Check your DMs. He might be in your DMs. Lord have mercy.
Big
Okay.
facts. And then we still gotta understand that these Turner diaries are still being sold at high numbers.
Absolutely.
Who's buying them?
Come on.
Who's buying these
Come
Turner
on.
diaries,
Come
bruh?
on. Come on.
You know, it's not us.
Come on.
So white supremacy, just like Sister Mel said, is very well alive and kicking. And Jim Crow just might be in your DMs.
In your DMs, baby.
You are absolutely right. Absolutely right, because he's definitely in some of these spaces.
Come on.
I'm glad he's not in this space.
Amen to that. Amen to that. So a fresh wave of white terror was hurled at those who supported the dismantling of Jim Crow. White citizens councils were formed in almost every southern city and backwater town. Oh wait, I read that part right there, didn't I? Southern city and backwater town. Yeah, let me skip around, y'all. We live. Replay gang, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, so I said all that to catch my place. So just as Southern legislators had passed black codes in response to the early steps of Reconstruction in the years immediately following Brown versus Board, 5 Southern legislators passed nearly 50 new Jim Crow laws. In the streets, resistance turned to violence. The Ku Klux Klan reasserted itself as a powerful terrorist organization committing castrations, killings, and the bombing of black homes and churches. NAACP leaders were beaten, pistol whipped, and shot. As quickly as it began, desegregation across the South ground to a halt. In 1958, 13 school systems were desegregated. In 1960, only 17. In the absence of a massive grassroots movement directly challenging the racial caste system, Jim Crow might be alive and well today. Yet in the 1950s, a civil rights movement was brewing, emboldened by the Supreme Court's decisions and a shifting domestic and international political environment. With extraordinary bravery, civil rights leaders, activists, and progressive clergy launched boycotts, marches, and sit-ins protesting the Jim Crow system. They endured fire hoses, police dogs, bombings, and beatings by white mobs, as well as by the police. Once again, federal troops were sent to the South to provide protection for blacks attempting to exercise their civil rights, and the violent reaction of white racists was met with horror in the North. So, here's my question: what happened? What happened that we cannot get federal protection now? Every other ethnicity, come on, come on. And we have
you hitting a good question, Mel.
Come on.
And I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna answer your question real quick before you go on.
Come on.
The reason why we are still in the same predicament is because we failed to upgrade our speech, our thought, and our act.
Come on with it.
It comes right back around to it, but keep on.
So every
other, I mean, because
go ahead, bro. Muko, you could.
It always comes back around to that. And what happens is when it comes time to upgrade your speech, thoughts, and actions, you know what happens to us on an individual level?
What? We
say, nah, fuck that. I still want to do that same thing. I'm addicted to doing that degenerate. Whatever it may be, you know? And that is one of the things that keeps white supremacy alive. You have to participate in it.
Yeah.
You don't have to, but this is our addiction talking. This is our distractionary habit.
Yeah.
of being, addicted to distraction.
Mm-hmm.
I call it distractionary weaknesses.
Yeah.
I know everybody's tired of hearing this, but it keeps coming back around to this same point. And if we keep failing, on upgrading our thought, our speech, and our action,
Mm-hmm.
we will continue to be in the same position when we come back into this existence.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I think that's why it's still being perpetuated. Jim Crow is still alive and well, just
Mm-hmm.
like its brother, racism, white supremacy.
There you go.
They don't plan on leaving anytime soon.
Oh no,
they are going to have to be made to leave the building.
Right. There it goes. And, and Tatiana Harris again is saying that the crime bill was another component of the new Jim Crow. Let's keep it moving right along here. It says here, the dramatic high point of the civil rights movement occurred in 1963. The Southern struggle had grown from a modest group of Black students demonstrating peacefully at one lunch counter to the largest mass movement for racial reform and civil rights in the 20th century. Between autumn 1961 and the spring of 1963, 20,000 men, women, and children had been arrested. In 1963 alone, another 15,000 were imprisoned, and 1,000 desegregation protests occurred across the region in more than 100 cities. On June 12, 1963, President Kennedy announced that he would deliver to Congress a strong civil rights bill, a declaration that transformed him into a widely recognized ally of the civil rights movement. Following Kennedy's assassination, President Johnson professed his commitment to the goal of the full assimilation of more than 20 million Negroes into American life and ensured the passage of comprehensive civil rights legislation. And I'm going to do a quick sidebar here and say that this President Johnson, he wasn't on Kennedy's team during the time that Kennedy was talking about the civil rights that we should have as Black Americans. It was, I think, what shocked him into action to at least make this statement and make this commitment was the fact that Kennedy had been assassinated. I think it threw him into some kind of shock. And chances are, and this is just my guess, but chances are he had some inside scoop, okay? But something changed his mind. He wasn't an ally with Kennedy during the time Kennedy was making moves and statements to make this civil rights for Black Americans to pop off. Johnson was not a fan of it at the time while Kennedy was living. So going further, it says the Civil Rights Act of 1964 formally dismantled the Jim Crow system of discrimination in public accommodations, employment, voting, education, and federally financed activities. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 arguably had even greater scope as it rendered illegal numerous discriminatory barriers to effective political participation by African Americans and mandated federal review of all new voting regulations so that it would be possible to determine whether their use would perpetuate voting discrimination. Y'all, they are rolling back all of our protections and trying to re-implement Jim Crow. Everything that they did in these 60s to ensure that Black Americans had some juice, had some level of equality, right now, right in present day, they are taking every legal step to roll it back. Shout out to Trouble in the Twitter space. Brother Moko, you got any comment about that?
Yeah, I do, and you have definitely laid it out perfect. I cannot even say it any better, so I will add to it. We just had a mass shooting here in Baltimore last night. Over 30, 2 murdered, over 30 injured. Okay, block party.
Wow.
The only way that this is possible is if this action that Sister Mel Cruz is talking about is actually happening. Okay, this is the evidence of it actually happening.
Come on.
All right, they just had a couple mass shootings last week and the week before that in other cities. Okay, so this right here, what they're what we're seeing right before our eyes, the reason why this book, 10 years old, is still prevalent to this very minute is because, again, the failure to upgrade our thought, speech, and action fails us to, it makes us fail to implement certain shit. You know, if we upgrade our thought, our speech, and our action, we won't accept certain shit. You know what I'm saying? We would no longer accept certain shit. So it would be a lot more discord, so to speak. I guess I could call it that. Or it would be more pushback is a better word. It would be more pushback from us as a collective if we were upgrading our thought, speech, and action.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It all revolves around us pushing against this system.
Right.
Okay? And that means on all fronts. Refusing to be confused. Refusing, look, repeating this. Refusing to argue with someone that looks like you. Refusing it. Like, look, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to let that shit happen. Like, I guarantee or I depend on breathing every day. This is how we got to take these upgrades. This is how we got to make these upgrades in order to eliminate racism, white supremacy. And I think I can't even say it any better than that. We have to be firm. We have to be 100%. Definitely. Unapologetic. Intentional.
Yes, indeed. Shout out to Trouble, who has graced the stage. Trouble, shout out. How you doing this morning, Trouble?
Hey, Sister Trouble.
Yeah.
Hey, you two. What's good with you? Thanks for inviting me to the stage. The one and only male Cruz.
You already know it, girl. You know it. Any thoughts, any comments about this book? Because you said you have this book. Any thoughts or comments that you want to add to the conversation? It's cool if you don't. But just want to make sure you get that opportunity. You always spit some fire, too.
No, I just rolled up into the space, so I want to hold back a little bit. But I can't get when I was hearing what you were saying about how they're trying to take us back. I think that you're 100% right on that. To a certain degree, I wonder just how far back they're trying to take us. But when I look at it, I don't think that it's just necessarily about taking us back specifically. I also think that they're targeting their own women at the same time too. So I'm really just trying to suss this thing out because the traps that they've always set for us in today's time, it's affecting them via their women. So when you look at things like the legislation for abortion, abortion was a trap for the black family. They wanted to set us up to keep us from having babies, but their women has really got caught up in that loophole today, so they hurried up and snatched that thing back. And when you talk about affirmative action, did it really affect us or did it really affect them? Because it's white women who benefit the most from affirmative action.
Anyway.
So are they, at some point in time, is this a backhanded way of targeting her? I mean, I know that they don't have that set in place, but once you start tinkering with things, eventually you get around to it. So I'm just watching.
All right. I told you, Trouble always cooking with fire. And Trouble, you ain't even in front of the stove. You just sitting there thinking of the recipe and girl, look, and putting it on the plate. Look, ooh, get it, girl. Let me keep moving up in this.
Trouble, before that, really, Trouble just made a really profound point.
Didn't she, though?
She made a really fucking profound point because it's the white race, the one that they have to worry about is actually the one that perpetuates white supremacy the most, which is the white woman. But to add to what Trouble said, which has a lot of fucking truth to it, white women are the biggest betrayers of white supremacy too. Because when you have offspring by a black man, that offspring is not white.
Absolutely
that offspring is indeed black.
Yeah.
Especially if the father is black, rather. Yeah. So, Trouble, I want to, she has definitely brought up a profound fucking point.
Ain't that it?
They could be trying to, refine their white women. You know what I'm saying? Right. Making them more of white supremacists because they have so many collaborators, white women collaborating with the black race. Yeah. Getting these black men, having their black babies. Yeah, absolutely, Trouble. That's a fine assessment.
That's one hell of a point she made. No doubt about it. Let's keep getting through this here. Now, within 5 years, the effects of the Civil Rights Revolution were undeniable. Between 1964 and 1969, the percentage of African American adults registered to vote in the South soared. In Alabama, the rate leaped from 19.3% to 61.3%. In Georgia, 27.4% to 60.4%. In Louisiana, 31.6% to 60.8%, and in Mississippi, 6.7% to 66.5%. Suddenly, Black children could shop in department stores, eat at restaurants, drink from water fountains, and go to amusement parks that were once off limits. Miscegenation laws were declared unconstitutional, and the rate of interracial marriage climbed. While dramatic progress was apparent in the political and social realms, civil rights activists became increasingly concerned that without major economic reforms, the vast majority of Blacks would remain locked in poverty. Thus, at the peak of the civil rights movement, activists and others began to turn their attention to economic problems, arguing that socioeconomic inequality interacted with racism to produce crippling poverty and related social problems. Economic issues emerged as a major focus of discontent. As political scientists Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward have described, Blacks became more indignant over their condition, not only as an oppressed racial minority in a white society, but as poor people in an affluent one. So Black folks said, wait a minute, now this y'all doing too much. We still economically disadvantaged in a sea of affluency, and none of those affluent folks look like us. Now, perhaps the most famous demonstration in support of economic justice is the March on Washington for Jobs and Economic Freedom in August 1963. The wave of activism associated with economic justice helped to focus President Kennedy's attention on poverty and Black unemployment. In the summer of 1963, he initiated a series of staff studies on those subjects. By the end of the summer, he declared his intention to make the education of poverty a key legislative objective in 1964. Following Kennedy's assassination, President Lyndon Johnson embraced the anti-poverty rhetoric with great passion, calling for an unconditional war on poverty in his State of the Union address in January of '64. Weeks later, he proposed to Congress the Economic Opportunities Bill of 1964. I'm going to stop right there. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in, jump in, or if any thoughts were ignited. What's tea, y'all?
Well, that year 64 was very valuable because if y'all remember in 64, that was the planning of assassination, especially of our brother Malcolm X, because he was starting to make so much sense. But you start seeing a trend. You start seeing the trend of our spokesmen who start speaking on the same talking points, and shortly after, they end up assassinated or in some weird, strange accident or sent to the hospital for something really simple and never come out. Dick Gregory, Khalid Muhammad, Amos Wilson. I can go on, okay? These guys went to the hospital for stomach ache. Dick Gregory didn't even go for a stomach ache. He went for something else, something simple. They never left, okay? You take your enemies to the hospital, but what I see from 64 up until now is strategic eliminating of our spokesmen.
Come on.
Repeat, our spokesmen, not our leaders. We have never had a Black leader, okay?
Yeah.
Because every spokesman begs. They have to beg, meaning ask more than once for whatever they are asking for. Leaders, they don't do that. They ask once and they get it. Matter of fact, they don't ask. They make the demand. I want this and it's done. That's a leader. So I want us to start really, just like Sister Trouble said, looking through this with a fine-tooth comb. Right. It ain't going to take a lot of time. You know what I'm saying? Because when you start seeing the patterns, it's going to be hard to unsee it.
Come on with it.
Just like when you learn what racism, white supremacy is, it is hard to unsee it. I see it in every area of people activity, even with homeless people. That's why you always hear Brother Muko harping about changing your values. You know what I'm saying? Upgrading your thought, speech, and action. I know that shit get repetitive, and I know people get tired of hearing it, but you know the truth hurts. and just like Trouble said, you know, if we don't start analyzing this shit with a fine tooth comb, we will. Matter of fact, fuck us. Our offspring and their offspring are going to go through worse.
Yes, indeed.
All right, so if you love your little girl, you love your little boy, you know what I'm saying? You need to think about being honest about racism, white supremacy, and dismantling it. You know what I'm saying?
Indeed.
Shout out to Sister Trouble and Sister Cruz again, having this space. I'm glad it's recorded because I know a lot of people are in that slave church right now, and they not on. But I'm gonna tell you, I trust that it's gonna be hundreds re-listening to this broadcast.
Well, we hope they do, because we'd love to hear all voices to help break it down and connect the dots. That's why it's so important. Connect the dots. So thanks everybody in the Twitter space. Y'all share the space if you would, please, because I want us to have a discussion where we're hearing these different perspectives. Because had Trouble not said what she said, Trouble again. And that's okay. I got to come back to it. These laws that they're passing that on the surface look like it's to deny and harm Black Americans, quietly it is impacting white Americans, especially those who are socioeconomically in the same boat, you know, some Black Americans are in. So while on the surface they're saying, oh yeah, you know, we're going to stop this, it's fair to everybody, but then when you get all the way down to it, the target is not just Black Americans. It's going to be more people that are going to be what do they call it, collateral damage, and that's the whole point. That's the whole point. So let me keep reading here. Let me see. I lost my place here. Let me see here. Hold on just a minute. Brother Muko, you got to cooking so good, I had to go and look in the pot, and that's what made me lose my space. Let me see here.
Yeah, this is such a broad topic, but it is a topic that needs to be discussed. And you know, according to counter racist logic, the only way anything that's made by man can be taken apart by man.
Right.
And this is our way of taking it apart.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But we have to be ready to put that new system in place with those two guarantees that I always harp on, that are going to be hella hard for us to maintain. And I trust that we can do it with just the people in this space.
Come on with it. All right. So keeping it moving, the shift in focus served to align the goals of the civil rights movement with key political goals of poor and working class whites who were also demanding economic reforms. As the civil rights movement began to evolve into a poor people's movement, it promised to address not only Black poverty, but white poverty as well, thus raising the specter of poor and working class movement that cut across racial lines. Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders made it clear that they viewed the eradication of economic inequality as the next front in the human rights movement, and made great efforts to build multiracial coalitions that sought economic justice for all. Genuine equality for Black people, King reasoned, demanded a racial restructuring of society, one that would address the needs of the Black and white poor throughout the country. Shortly before his assassination, he envisioned bringing to Washington, D.C., thousands of the nation's disadvantaged in an interracial alliance that embraced rural and ghetto Blacks, Appalachian whites, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Native Americans to demand jobs and income, the right to live. In a speech delivered in 1968, King acknowledged There had been some progress for blacks since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, but King insisted that the current challenges required even greater resolve and that the entire nation must be transformed for economic justice to be more than a dream for poor people of all colors. As historian Gerald McKnight observes, King was proposing nothing less than a radical transformation of the civil rights movement into a populist crusade calling for the redistribution of economic and political power. America's only civil rights leader was now focusing on class issues and was planning to descend on Washington with an army of poor to shake the foundations of the power structure and force the government to respond to the needs of the ignored underclass. And I got to get in here and chop this up some, because this is what is happening now, if you will, but they are intentionally leaving Black Americans out of the equation. They're intentionally leaving Black Americans out of the equation, and they're not even really focusing on the poor. They're not focusing on that. I read an article, they don't do it now, only because, for whatever reason, maybe it's because too many immigrants. But there was back then, I can't even think of what the year was. You could buy your citizenship up and through here to this country. All you had to do was write the congressman of the state that you called yourself trying to get into, and donate to that campaign and develop a relationship with them, and they would write a bill, present the bill would be voted on, and if it got the votes, that one family, that one group of people became citizens. They cut across the field and went and avoided all the other rigmarole and came into the country and became a citizen. But those are people that are coming from other countries that already had the dough, so they could afford to, do a bribe or donate to the campaign or whatever. But they had the money to make it happen, and they had the money to get that law written and get that law put in place. Anybody on the panel have anything to say about anything at this time?
Well, I will say this. I'm noticing you reading, and I'm noticing key words come up.
Mm-hmm.
Races, the mistreatment of it all.
Mm-hmm.
I posted on my page and on my Be More Codified page. I was in a space with 3 people who do boycott, and they had posted race classification paper document, and it had 3 race classifications on there. And I was pointing out how slippery and slimy these white supremacists are when they're confusing us. I suggest that from this point on, when we look at these race classifications, not because Nelly Fuller said it, but because according to counter-racist logic, it will help us not be confused. Those 3 race classifications that I posted on my page were white, and Negro. Okay, that means white and AND, Negro, and then it had Negro. Okay, now I was pointing out for the spaces that white supremacy knows exactly what it's doing. Okay, because it laid the platform. White meant white supremacists. White and Negro was to get us confused to think that included white and Negro. All that is white people, and I got my quotation fingers up, that supposedly don't practice racism. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then you have what's called non-white Negro. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, they, of course, had to have this in place, and they have did what they call an upgrade to it and added so many race classifications. But I still challenge everybody to look at those race classifications, because the race classifications, if you read them very closely, it is still white supremacists, white people, and non-white people. They just added a whole slew of non-white people to it. Okay? But we are still the victim. Because see, that supreme position, the racist is nothing but another word for position. Okay? I suggest everybody think of it like this because I think it will give you a clearer picture of what's actually going on. Not saying that we don't have a clear picture now,
Sure.
but it'll keep us on a course of being focused on the white supremacists.
Right.
Okay, because I've heard a lot of people in here say, not in this space, but on Twitter, period. I hear a lot of people saying, well, it's bigger than racism. I beg to differ. When racism controls every area of people activity, it controls who's classified as such, who is harmed, and who's not harmed. Okay? When you got a language, white supremacist language, where all the words mean everything and nothing at the same time, you'll get your ass whipped, and when you're yelling for justice or for it to stop, those words won't mean anything. Okay? And that's where we're getting to now. You know what I'm saying? When we're saying stop the killing, stop killing our black women, stop killing our black children, the word stop doesn't mean anything. Why? Because it's continuing to happen. So it still revolves around upgrading thought, speech, and action. But I just wanted to point that out, that these white supremacists are masters at getting the victims to argue with each other and forget that the white supremacist is in the picture. So when you hear somebody say it's bigger than white supremacy, say, nah, see, that's white supremacy working on you.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, white supremacy wants you to think that it's bigger than white supremacy. Why? So you won't be concentrating on white supremacy.
There it is.
Okay, and that's what this book is displaying. That's what Michelle is displaying in all of these pages. Okay, she's going on through it with a fine-tooth comb to show y'all that, look, to show us, not y'all, us, me too. Look, race is a position. Okay, so don't get caught up when somebody says supremacy or ain't it supreme to me. Look, that's just to
have you chasing your circle.
Distraction.
Yeah,
running
in circles.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely,
so
brother.
You keep that concentration on the white supremacists, and this is why they're scared now, y'all. This is why they're invading our spaces. This is why they're recording live spaces and recorded spaces and putting them on platforms like YouTube and Gab and all these other platforms. They're doing this because they're trying to see what the collective of us is really thinking. You know why? Because we no longer running our mouths. We no longer speaking emotionally. We're no longer talking without thinking. We're thinking now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that's the threat to white supremacy.
Well, and let me jump in on here on your brother Moko. Not only are we talking, not only are we thinking and then talking, and our talking reflects what we have thought about, we are actually making some sense. We're actually calling out that, hey, you know what? In our speech, we're calling out. We see what y'all doing over there. We see in 1964 where all the action, happened to provide us with these protections. And now we see in 2023, all of the actions taken to withdraw at least the protections that are at least legally afforded to us. Y'all still ain't doing it, even though it's on the law. Y'all still ain't protecting us, and you're manipulating every circumstance to make it appear as though we don't deserve protection. It would be hurting and harming others if we don't allow them to take away from us in order to give to the others. I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm hoping that's clear. Just trying to add some context to it. Y'all, please share the space. The YouTube channel is in the Jumbotron. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Trying to get the channel out, get more voices on this conversation to continue adding context and bringing about points that some of us may not have even thought of. And shout out to Lizzie Mack and the YouTube streets. Appreciate you for pulling up. Let's keep it moving right along with the success of the civil rights movement and the launching of the Poor People's Movement. It was apparent to all that a major disruption in the nation's racial equilibrium had occurred. Yet, as we shall see below, Negroes stood only a brief moment in the sun. Conservative whites began once again to search for a new racial order that would conform to the needs and constraints of the time. This process took place with the understanding of whatever the new order would be, it would have to be formally race neutral. It could not involve explicit or clearly intentional race discrimination. A similar phenomenon had occurred, or as you were, a similar phenomenon had followed slavery and Reconstruction as white elites struggled to define a new racial order with the understanding that whatever the new order would be, it could not include slavery. Jim Crow eventually replaced slavery, but now it too had died, and it was unclear what might take its place. Barred by law from invoking race explicitly, those committed to racial hierarchy were forced to search for a new means of achieving their goals according to the new rules of American democracy. And I'm going to stop right here and interject something because we learned, I think probably in the first book discussion we did, where when the framers of the Constitution, where they said we have got to make sure that the affluent, the opulent, the small number of uber rich folks in this country, their rights and their protections have to be the priority over everybody else. So in this statement where it says that it was unclear, they had to figure out what the new order would be, and that it couldn't include slavery. It says here, Jim Crow eventually replaced slavery, but now it too had died. It was unclear what might take place. Barred by law from invoking race explicitly, those committed to racial hierarchy were forced to search for new means of achieving their goals. And that's always been the goal. Protect the folks that got it all. And at the time when the Constitution was being framed, it was white folks that had it all. So this is why we had slavery and it lasted so long. And this is why when slavery ended, they had to come up with something. So they came up with Jim Crow. They came up with those, I can't even think of the word, the Sugarland Five. And we talked about it last week, where if you didn't have a job, you went to jail. I don't know if one of y'all remembers the term. I can't think of it, but
yeah, the vagrant law.
Yeah, all those things, So let me just keep reading. History reveals that the seeds of the new system of control were planted well before the end of the civil rights movement. A new race neutral language was developed for appealing to old racist sentiments, a language accompanied by a political movement that succeeded in putting the vast majority of blacks back in their place. Proponents of racial hierarchy found they could install a new racial caste system without violating the law or the new limits of acceptable political discourse by demanding law and order rather than segregation forever. And that's going to lead us into the birth of mass incarceration. And it's also going to lead us and show us about how that phrase, because Trump has used it, a couple of these most recent politicians have used that code word buzz phrase, law and order. And this is what Reagan, and this is why this book is so good, because as we get back further into this mass incarceration piece, Michelle reveals the trick. She pulls the curtains back and says, this is what the trick is. It wasn't about no law and order. It was about using the phrase law and order to say, hey, you ought to be scared of these black folks. And this is where this mass incarceration became a key element in, once again, negatively and adversely impacting Black Americans. That's why we're the least in the population, but we maximize statistically in these prisons. The floor is open. If you want to request a mic, please do. Anybody that's already on the panel, y'all got anything y'all want to chime in on the situation?
I think this ties into also making non-white blacks the permanent working class.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, if we notice from this period, even on today, it is a heart to black people with having jobs, not owning businesses, but having jobs.
Right.
I see this throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even now here in the 2000s. Some of us are still preaching to our children to get a job and not to own a business, not to be a business partner in this U.S. economy. I think that plays a big part too at allowing us to achieve certain positions in government, just like the large influx of mayors that happened in the 70s and the 80s. I believe that was just a move to further lock us into a working workforce, a permanent workforce.
Right. Right.
Now you have undocumented people coming in, and they're trying to put them as the permanent workforce, and now it's called the replacement theory. This has happened before.
Yeah.
This has happened before. You're reading about it now. And what we're seeing right now is the same exercise being implemented on us once again, and on the undocumented illegals that's coming in at the same time. So they're doing their refining and eliminating at the same time.
Yeah.
We are the ones that they're trying to eliminate, and the Mexicans are who they're trying to refine as the new permanent workforce. That then moves us down to the permanent underclass, which Dr. Claude Anderson always speaks on.
And that permanent underclass position, it appears as though they would prefer that the permanent underclass serve in the prisons, okay? Because if the prison is a privatized institution, then guess what? One particular family is going to make all the money. Now, y'all, I'm going to get into this other sub title here in this, still in chapter 1, the birth of mass incarceration. This stuff right here is enough to blow your mind. But before I do that, y'all do like Tatiana Harris say, do like she say, hit the like button on the way in, share the Twitter space, y'all, like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get more voices and more perspectives to add further context to this discussion, because the more we know, the more we grow. So let's keep it moving. The birth of mass incarceration. The rhetoric of law and order was first mobilized in the late 1950s as Southern governors and law enforcement officials attempted to generate and mobilize white opposition to the civil rights movement. In the years following Brown versus Board of Education, civil rights activists used direct action tactics in an effort to force reluctant Southern states to desegregate public facilities. Southern governors and law enforcement officials often characterized these tactics as criminal and argued that the rise of the civil rights movement was indicative of a breakdown of law and order. Support of civil rights legislation was derided by Southern conservatives as merely rewarding lawbreakers. For more than a decade, from the mid-1950s until the late 1960s, conservatives systematically and strategically linked opposition to civil rights legislation to calls for law and order, arguing that Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of civil disobedience was a leading cause of crime. And sidebar, we know good and daggone well Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't telling people to go and whoop folks up. It was what Martin Luther King was trying to do on a peaceful level where we was getting whooped up on. But they just flipped the script. Just flip the script. It's a I might not say so rhetoric. Keeping it moving. Civil rights protests were frequently depicted as criminal rather than political in nature, and federal courts were accused of excessive lenience toward lawlessness, thereby contributing to the spread of crime. In the words of the then Vice President Richard Nixon, the increasing crime rate can be traced directly to the spread of the corrosive doctrine that every citizen possesses an inherent right to decide for himself which laws to obey and when to disobey them. Some segregationists went further, insisting that integration causes crime, citing lower crime rates in southern states as evidence that segregation was necessary. In the words of Representative John Bell Williams, the exodus of Negroes from the South and their influx into the great metropolitan centers of other areas of the nation has been accompanied by a wave of crime. What has civil rights accomplished for these areas? Segregation is the only answer, as most Americans, not the politicians, have realized for hundreds of years. So this was his rhetoric that see y'all, we got rid of segregation, and look what it did. It done caused more crime. All right. So unfortunately, at the same time that civil rights were being identified as a threat to law and order, the FBI was reporting fairly dramatic increases in the national crime rate. Beginning in the 1960s, crime rates rose in the United States for a period of about 10 years. Reported street crime quadrupled and homicide rates nearly doubled. Despite significant controversy over the accuracy of the crime statistics during this period, and it has here in parentheses, the FBI's method of tracking crime was changing. Sociologists and criminologists agree that crime did rise in some categories quite sharply. The reasons for the crime wave are complex, but can be explained in large part by the rise of the baby boom generation, the spike in the number of young men in the 15 to 24 age group, which historically has been responsible for most crimes. And and this is my sidebar, and that is not specific to race. It's that age, it's that maturity level, it's that feeling of I'm immortal. They out there doing crime. That was nothing new. But those statistics, they utilize those to frame it around Black Americans and the fact that we were making some advancements in civil rights, and the fact that the laws had shut down this segregation. It says here, the surge of young men in the population was occurring at precisely the same time that unemployment rates for Black men were rising sharply, but the economic and demographic factors contributing to rising crime were not explored in the media. Instead, crime reports were sensationalized and offered as further evidence of the breakdown in lawfulness, morality, and social stability in the wake of the civil rights movements. And to make matters worse, riots erupted in the summer of 1964 in Harlem and Rochester, followed by a series of uprisings that swept the nation following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. The racial imagery associated with the riots gave fuel to the argument that civil rights for Blacks led to rampant crime. Cities like Philadelphia and Rochester were described as being victims of their own generosity. Conservatives argued that having welcomed Blacks migrating from the South, these cities were repaid with crime-ridden slums and Black discontent. Now, I'm going to stop right there. Anybody got anything they want to share or add on what I just read, what I just covered? Anybody?
Yeah, what they did was they created the situation. They threw a rock and they hit their hand. By the FBI's reporting, it wasn't thorough in the least. It was skewed at best. Because what they didn't say was that the crime rise was due to their own fuckery, to what they were doing. They didn't say in their crime statistics that it was Blacks who was creating the crimes, because in fact it was them who was creating the crimes against Blacks. So if there was a rise in crime, it was at their own hands and their own making. But they tried to make it seem as if all of these things going on was due to Black dissidents, when it wasn't. It was due to white dissidents, rather. And that's how they operate. That's how they've always operated. And I always say it's like an Alice in Wonderland, upside down world where up is down and down is to the left and around the corner somewhere with these people. And they never tell the full truth. They always lie. And it's odd how they continue to have a mind hold on their own people to where they can just put out any old lie, and their people don't use any type of common sense, any old type of anything to discern the truth.
Mm-hmm.
They just say whatever they say, and they can know the truth, but they are still willing to accept the lie so that they don't have to hold themselves accountable for it. And that's still going on today. You see the truth, but you're still willing to go with the lie because at least you and your people, your white people, can escape having to deal with the fact that you are the problem.
Right. Good point, Trouble. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Trouble, Trouble, you are hitting on all cylinders every day, girl.
Cooking.
Let me tell you something, woman. You are absolutely 100% correct. And to add to that, I just want to bring in a movie scene from a true story of Malcolm X movie. If y'all remember when Malcolm X, soon as the white woman allowed the white man, or I'll use a better word, collaborated with the black man, okay, this definitely indeed opened up crime, or quote unquote crime, because now you have the white woman who was the lead perpetuator in racism, white supremacy, collaborating with the black man to do what? To rob the white supremacist. So that's what Trouble was talking about, with them not telling the full story. They throwing a rock and covering their hands. Yeah, you done already robbed us and robbed our ancestors. So now you're sitting on all this generational wealth gap money, and think we ain't gonna come back and take it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, wouldn't you come back and take what was yours?
Wouldn't you?
So it's not a crime if I'm coming back taking what was already taken from me.
Come on.
That's not a crime.
Come on.
So yeah, Trouble is absolutely right, and you're right. It's a lot of lying going on here, and the white supremacist has made this our culture. What are you talking about, Brother Muko? We're talking about fucking Jim Crow. I'm talking about lying. Okay? This is how they sustain Jim Crow, by lying through their white ass fucking teeth. Okay, excuse my French. White goddamn teeth. Okay? And they not only do it themselves, but they implement this on the victims. Why? So the victims can start emulating them and wanting to be like them, aka or i.e. Equality. I want to be equal to the white man. No, I don't want to be equal to that goddamn evil. You shouldn't either. But this is the starting of that illusion.
There you go. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Trump. Go ahead.
You see, when they started talking about the unemployment rate for a certain demographic of men, well, if you make these particular men out to be some type of monsters who don't listen and they're negative in every aspect, who's going to want to hire them? Or even if you didn't want to hire them, now you have an excuse not to hire them.
Come on, girl. Come on with it.
When you read about the age range, they just threw some numbers up there from 15 to 24. Well, that's from 15 to 24, which reminded me of the time frame when I was going through homelessness, and my husband and I, with the 2 kids we had at the time, and the baby on the way, we learned at the family shelter. Now, this is a family shelter, that men from the ages of 15 to 24 was not allowed to come in with their parents because of what they were perceived to do. And I didn't understand it then. I questioned it, but they wasn't able to give me a thorough understanding, because there were women there who had 15-year-old sons, but they had to send them to the men's to the men's shelter to stay by themselves, because the family shelter would not allow males over the age of 15 to stay with the family. So that thought process runs deep, and it's still running deep to this day.
Yeah. And that's strategic. That's strategic. And these shelters, and JV, you're going to be up right next. That's a strategic plan, because any of those homeless shelters, if they're a 501c3 or anything like that, they are required to adhere to government laws and things of that nature. And so They're taking their marching orders from the very people that are continuing to keep Jim Crow, slavery, if you want to just call it what it really is, to keep that alive. JV, unmute your mic. What's T, baby?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We sure can.
Right, so I jumped in it when I was talking about the riots that was going towards
Yeah.
the United States.
Yes.
Well, the catalyst to it wasn't just like direct violence and terrorism and all these other things. It was a lot of it was very much economic. You had a whole slew of what do you call it, contract leasing, where these homeowners or
that convict leasing. Yeah, that was the phrase I was looking for. Yeah.
So they maintain the equity and they charge us these exorbitant prices, and we miss one payment, although we might have paid for years, they'd kick us out the house. It was so predatory the way they did that thing. Also the predatory lending, where we didn't have any capital, which we don't even have today, but we didn't have it then, and we had all these creditors and abusive money lenders and stores, groceries, so everything. Rent centers, all that type of thing.
Yeah.
And we were just fucking set up.
Yes.
You know? And so people and meanwhile they were being extended credit through the FHA, and you had a bunch of poor white people moving into the middle class with all these subsidies. Like that whole work hard bootstrap shit, like they didn't bootstrap anything. So black people weren't stupid, they were pissed off, and what they were targeting mostly in those riots, air quote, was they were targeting the creditors. They were burning the credit markets, the credit stores. So it wasn't like just some crazy people on the street just burning their neighborhood. No, they were in debt. But this is the caveat. The people that were pushing the counter argument were the media infrastructure. So CBS TV broadcast announced, quote, "This was not a riot. It was an insurrection against all authority." So they were hitting us on all fronts. Not only did they activate their police department, they activated their media, their political pundits, and all this type of thing. And they just wanted us to be dead. They wanted us to suffer. So it's a lot of the same today. I've been reading up. A lot of these things is not like it's contemporary. It's still happening today.
Right.
Did you all know within the last 10 years, the justice is suing for auto lenders in the tunes of $98 million, GMAC, Toyota, $24 million for predatory lending. So, like, this thing is pervasive. It's happening now. This is not just something that happened 60 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to share.
No. Thank you. That's a good observation. And I don't know if anybody remembers when might have been a couple months ago where some family, a black man, bought a car, paid for the car, and then come to find out that the car was sold by the dealer, but the title was wrong. The dealer should not have been able to sell the car, and then the dealer told the black man, "We're not giving you your money back." So what I'm wondering, and I'm guessing, that the dealer was able to file a claim for having bought a car that was sold to him illegally in that respect. So the dealer got paid from the man buying the car, and then he got to file a claim on the car, and the man is stuck with a car he can't put a title on in his name. That's what brought the whole thing out in focus, is because he couldn't even get the title for a car that he's paid on, and there's no recourse. Let me keep moving through here. Barry Goldwater, in his 1964 presidential campaign, aggressively exploited the riots and the fears of black crime, laying the foundation for the Get Tough on Crime movement that would emerge years later. In a widely quoted speech, Goldwater warned voters, "Choose the way of Johnson, of the Johnson administration, and you will have the way of mobs in the street." Civil rights activists who argued that the uprisings were directly related to widespread police harassment and abuse were dismissed by conservatives out of hand. If blacks conduct themselves in an orderly way, they will not have to worry about police brutality, argued West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd. And yet again, shout out to Tatiana Harris in the YouTube streets, who said that Robert Byrd was Hillary Clinton and Jim Crow Joe Biden's mentor. While many civil rights advocates in this period actively resisted the attempt by conservatives to use rising crime as an excuse to crack down on impoverished Black communities, some Black activists began to join the calls for law and order. Now we know who them Black activists were, the Cancuns, okay? Some Black activists began to join the calls for law and order and express support for harsh responses to lawbreakers. As Vanessa Barker described in The Politics of Imprisonment, Black activists in Harlem, alarmed by rising crime rates, actively campaigned for what would become notorious Rockefeller drug laws, as well as other harsh sentencing measures. Wittingly or unwittingly, they found themselves complicit in the emergence of a penal system unprecedented in world history. Black support for harsh responses to urban crime, support born of desperation and legitimate concern over unraveling basic security in inner city communities, helped provide political cover for conservative politicians who saw an opening to turn back the clock on racial progress in the United States. Conservatives could point to Black support for highly punitive approaches to dealing with the problems of the urban poor as proof that race had nothing to do with their law and order agenda. Now, I know somebody got something to say because we see that now. Don't everybody unmute your mic at the same time. You got it, JV. You got it, baby.
Yeah, I want to share a story. I'm in
Come on.
Harlem, New York. Yeah, born and raised. Just a month ago, an 18-year-old shot somebody in a trigger warning, shot somebody dead on surveillance camera. And immediately the news cameras came up there and they put the cameras all in the face of these old ladies. They looked so heartbroken and they were like, period, or you need to stop the killing, there's too many guns. Then they switched the cameras to the local political leaders. We need a march, we need to do this and guns. Even myself, I was like, dang, it's crazy like that's out here, they shooting people up. Somebody directed me to the NYPD the website. When you go on the website, it shows that Harlem has one of the lowest crime records has ever had. It specifically states, maybe because this guy's case, I don't know. And in fact, you are 7 times more likely to be shot and murdered in Koreatown. And in fact, Wall Street has the biggest crime district. Wall Street, the financial district.
Right.
It's the most in robberies, assaults, all of these things. But somehow Harlem, South Bronx, all of these Black neighborhoods are painted with this type of crime-ridden type of thing. So it's literally happening now.
Yes.
And you have people coming out. Like, I don't know. We're uneducated, so we don't know. Like, we think we're the problem. Like you said, the people stood in front of it. Black people stood in front of it back then. It's still happening today. Exactly.
It's exactly happening today. And I think too, because I asked last week, why read this book? This book is a little more than 10 years old. Why read this book? We already know about this and that. I'm going to be honest with you. For me personally, I don't know all this history. I'm learning this history as I read these books. So that's one reason to read the book, to learn what you don't know. Let's start there. But another reason to read this book is because when it just slaps you in the face that what they did back then, they're doing it now. And we're seeing the nuances that they use to actually be successful in implementing these plans.
The plan change when it works.
Go ahead, Trouble. Yeah, go ahead, girl. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. The plans don't ever change when they work, and it worked then, and for some odd reason, it's still working today. Coonery is big business in coonery, and they always roll out to get those few Blacks who will agree with them, because again, they're in a throw a rock and hide your hand type of situation where they create the situation. And then they hide the fact that they created the situation, and by getting Black voices to add on to that, to say, yeah, I want the same thing you do. See, even other Black people, Black people are even talking about it. But no, you aren't talking to those Black people who are probably knowledgeable in the play, in the game.
Right. And so that leads me to question, do y'all really not see it? Or did you get a piece of a racial bribe? Y'all really don't see how you're being manipulated by taking a role that like what we just read and trouble what you just further expounded on. Because the people say, "Oh no, they're not cooning." That's let me keep reading because this is just doing too much for me. It's just troublesome because it's history repeating itself. It's history repeating itself. Let me keep it reading. Early on, little effort was made to disguise the racial motivations behind the law and order rhetoric and the harsh criminal justice legislation proposed in Congress. The most ardent opponents of civil rights legislation and desegregation were the most active on the emerging crime issue. Well-known segregationist George Wallace, for example, argued that the same Supreme Court that ordered integration and encouraged civil rights legislation was now bending over backwards to help criminals. Three other prominent segregationists, Senators McClellan, Irvin, and Thurman, led the legislative battle to curb the rights of criminal defendants. As the rules of acceptable discourse changed, however, segregationists distanced themselves from an explicitly racist agenda. They developed instead the racially sanitized rhetoric of cracking down on crime, rhetoric that is now used freely by politicians of every stripe. Conservative politicians who embrace this rhetoric purposely failed to distinguish between the direct action tactics of civil rights activists' violent rebellions in inner cities and traditional crimes of economic or violent nature. Instead, as Mark Maurer of the Sentencing Project has noted, all of these phenomenon were subsumed under the heading of crime in the streets. So that's a lot, but let me keep going because she's going to really break it down here. After the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the public debate shifted focus from segregation to crime. The battle lines, however, remain largely the same. Positions taken on crime policies typically cohered along the lines of racial ideology. Political scientist Vesla Weaver explains, votes cast in opposition to open housing, busing, the Civil Rights Act, and other measures time again showed the same division of votes for amendments to crime bills. Members of Congress who voted against civil rights measures proactively designed crime legislation and actively fought for their proposals. Now, do y'all get what I'm saying and what I just read? Is y'all feeling that? Did y'all huh? So you want to say, oh no, civil rights is wrong, and oh no, and see the Supreme Court is showing too much leniency, and y'all giving these criminals a break. So you want to shut all that down, our civil rights and the advancements made, and at the same time, you're writing legislation, you're encouraging legislation for stricter and tougher crime laws against crime that impact us. This allowed them not to use race in their conversation, but race, the race of Black Americans, was the main target. The floor is open if anybody has anything they wish to share on that topic. Shout out to Black Native in the space, girl. You know you better get on up here. Come on up here on the spot, girl, because you know you be spitting fire too. Any thoughts or comments on this, what we just covered?
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Republicans that put that stuff on crime. It was the Democrats as well.
Yes.
Clinton pushed that shit. Bush pushed that shit. They all got votes through that. What do you call it? What do they call that? That red meat. That's the red meat that they want to tough on crime instead of saying black. That's the bat signal. I forgot what they call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Totally.
Absolutely. And for anybody that right now can say, "Oh, that's not true. Come on, you guys. That's not true." Well, just dial it back, get on Google and look at when did we find out, when did an increase or a disproportionate number of Black men compared to white men in prison, and see what time that started and when that was alive and thriving. So it is true. It is true. And it's exactly what they were doing. It's exactly what they were doing. Let me keep reading. Although law and order rhetoric ultimately failed to prevent the formal dismantling of Jim Crow system, it proved highly effective in appealing to poor and working class whites, particularly in the South, who were opposed to integration and frustrated by the Democratic Party's apparent support for the civil rights movement. As Weaver notes, rather than fading, the segregationist crime race argument was reframed with a slightly different veneer and eventually became the foundation of the conservative agenda on crime. In fact, law and order rhetoric, first employed by segregationists, would eventually contribute to a major realignment of political parties in the United States. Black Native, Tatiana in the YouTube streets is shouting you out. She said, Black Native. Following the Civil War, party alignment was almost entirely regional. The South was solidly Democratic, embittered by the war, firmly committed to the maintenance of a racial caste system, and extremely hostile to federal intervention on behalf of African Americans. The North was overwhelmingly African Americans. The North was overwhelmingly Republican, and while Republicans were ambivalent about equality for African Americans, they were far more inclined to adopt and implement racial justice reforms than their Democratic counterparts below the Mason-Dixon line. And does anybody in the spaces know where this Mason-Dixon line is? Because I'm just going to be transparent and be honest and tell you, I don't know where that line is. Who knows? Anybody on the panel know where it's at? JV, Trouble, Tatiana. Yeah.
Dixon line is south of Philadelphia. But it goes across over through Virginia. So it's like a lot of West Virginia, Maryland, down to Delaware.
Okay.
Virginia,
awesome.
Up in that region.
Okay, perfect. Because I'm totally unaware of it. And shout out, sister, you just came up on the stage. If there's something you want to say right now, go ahead, unmute your mic and you got it.
Oh, yeah, this is my heritage. My family, both sides, mother and father, are from the Mason-Dixon line. Once you crossed over from Kentucky, Tennessee, you were in the South. And Kentucky still suffered the ravages of slavery, though you knew once the people came or were sent to the South, that was it. You probably wouldn't see them again. And currently I'm finding relatives from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, who were probably sent to those areas. From my research of my family from Virginia to the Carolinas, you know, so I mean, it was Kentucky. Wow. And I mean, to this day, we still talk about the Mason-Dixon line. And once my family, majority of them left Tennessee, all of that is our homeland to begin with. You know, however you want to say, indigenous, more so Indian. My people would not allow themselves on my father's side to be called Indian because they knew all the treaties that, you know, they broke.
Sure.
So,
absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Let me see. Let me get this. Elmira. Thank you, Elmira. Thank you for that. That's good information. Let me keep moving on through here, y'all. The Great Depression effectuated a sea change in American race relations and party alignment. The New Deal, spearheaded by the Democratic Party of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was designed to alleviate the suffering of poor people in the midst of the Depression, and blacks, the poorest of the poor, benefited disproportionately. While New Deal programs were rife with discrimination in their administration, they at least included blacks within the pool of beneficiaries. A development historian, Michael Klarman, has noted that was sufficient to raise black hopes and expectations after decades of malign neglect from Washington. Poor and working class whites in both the North and the South, no less than African Americans, responded positively to the New Deal, anxious for meaningful economic relief. As a result, the Democratic New Deal coalition evolved into an alliance of urban ethnic groups and the white South that dominated electoral politics from 1932 to the early 1960s. That dominance came to an abrupt end when the creation and implementation of what has come to be known as the Southern Strategy, the success of law and order rhetoric among working class whites, and the intense resentment of racial reforms, particularly in the South, led conservative Republican analysts to believe that a new majority could be created by the Republican Party, one that included the traditional Republican base, the white South, and half the Catholic blue-collar vote of the big cities. Some of the conservative political strategists admitted that appealing to racial fears and antagonisms was central to this strategy, though it had to be done surreptitiously. H.R. Haldeman, one of Nixon's key advisors, recalls that Nixon himself deliberately pursued a Southern racial strategy. President Nixon, emphasized that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. Similarly, John Ehrlichman, special counsel to the president, explained the Nixon administration's campaign strategy of 1968 in this way. We'll go after the racists. In Ehrlichman's view, the subliminal appeal to the anti-black voter was always present in Nixon's statements and speeches. And I've seen video where they recorded Nixon on the phone calling folks, I believe, the N-word. Does anyone have any thoughts about this? I know when we start talking about Nixon, we're taking it way back. I don't remember all the presidents' names, but I do remember Watergate and Nixon. I remember him seeing stuff about him. I don't know if he's calling them the N-words. Any thoughts or comments on what we just covered? Anybody?
To me, this is sort of like the last book reading that you held on this. It's the same strategy, just revised and updated for the times that we're in. So just like they were trying to turn the poor whites back then after Reconstruction against the blacks to make it seem like it was the blacks was the problems, and that's why they weren't getting work. And when they seen that we were kind of in collaboration with each other, so they needed to do something to
disrupt that.
To disrupt it. And so that's basically what they continue to do. But what, like I said, same shit, different toilet, right? Well. So it's just revised and updated to keep, because as long as you keep us fighting with each other or thinking that the other is the problem, then we can't collaborate together to see who actually is the problem. And before you read this passage, what I was thinking was that was the birth of dog whistles, when you changed language from just straight out saying you Negroes are the problem to we need to be tough on crime.
Right.
That's when you start using dog whistles and you're saying the same thing, but you're not saying it as loudly. So that's pretty much my thoughts on that. But same thing, different toilet. It's just, and revised.
Absolutely, Trouble. Absolutely. Republican strategist Kevin Phillips is often credited for offering the most influential argument in favor of a race-based strategy for Republican political dominance in the South. He argued in this book called The Emerging Republican Majority, published in 1969, that Nixon's successful presidential election campaign could point the way toward long-term political realignment and the building of a new Republican majority. If Republicans continue to campaign primarily on the basis of racial issues using coded anti-black rhetoric, he argued that Southern white Democrats had become so angered and alienated by the Democratic Party's support for civil rights reforms, such as desegregation and busing, that those voters could be easily persuaded to switch parties if those racial resentments could be maintained. Warren Weaver, a New York Times journalist who reviewed the book upon its release, observed that Phillips' strategy largely depended upon creating and maintaining a racially polarized political environment. Full racial polarization is an essential ingredient of Phillips' political pragmatism. He wants to see a black Democratic Party, particularly in the South, because this will drive into the Republican Party precisely the kind of anti-Negro white who will help constitute the emerging majority. This even leads him to support some civil rights efforts, appealing to the racism and vulnerability of working class whites had worked to defeat the populists at the turn of the century, and a growing number of conservatives believed the tactic should be employed again, albeit in a more subtle fashion. And last week we talked about the populists. The populist party had it going on. They actually had a multiracial or a biracial, what do we want to call it, alliance, where it wasn't about race with what the populist party was doing. They was like, look, we poll, we broke down, let's get some money and get jobs, and whether you're black or white, let's help the underserved. But they eventually were offered a quote unquote a bribe, and they broke down and they no longer existed. So they want to use that same strategy, but it appears to me that it was directed to get the anti-black white folks to align with the conservatives and get the votes that way. And the agenda in the first place was this dog whistle, as Trouble so eloquently stated, law and order. So we know law and order wasn't about law and order. Law and order was code for let's keep holding the black folks down some type of way. They couldn't have slavery. They had to do away with Jim Crow. And the book states, and we covered it earlier in this program, the book states they were trying to figure out another way to keep the same thing, but just call it by another name. Whew. It's a lot, y'all. It's a lot. It is a lot. So we've been at it almost 2 hours. This space is recorded. We on YouTube. The YouTube channel's in the Jumbotron. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to get it into the algorithm, trying to get more voices in on the conversation, and get more perspective and more context. Is anybody on the panel have any last words they want to share about any of the information that we covered today?
You pretty much summed it up really, really, really nicely. This has been an awesome space as always. Much information, and the crazy thing is, like you said earlier, it's not like a lot of this stuff we didn't already know, but it's just going over it again. You get to see throughout history how it was implemented and how it's still continuing to this day, and how it's still the same game, and they just twist it in little small ways to make it seem like it's a little bit different, but it's really the same thing. And they keep giving us the same things over and over. And I just wonder, is anybody in this country paying attention to this but us? Right. Or is it the same thing that I was saying earlier? You see what's going on, you know it's not right, but you don't want to be complicit. Acknowledging it means having to do something about it, and it means having to own it from your race of people. You have to admit that your people are fucked up. So you don't want to do that. So it's easier to ignore it and to pretend, oh my God, I didn't know this was going on with the Negro.
Come on.
So I'm going to land on that. Mel, thank you for the space and inviting me to be a part of it.
Indeed. Trouble's cooking, and you just threw some cayenne pepper in there. Go ahead, brother. Whoever that was, my bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, I found that quote that you was looking for. In Nixon campaign, after Johnson and the civil rights, and after MLK died, Nixon put it bluntly when he promised Southern Republicans that he would retreat on civil rights and, quote, lay off pro-Negro crap if elected president.
Well, sir. Wales, and y'all not gonna tell me that and thank you for that, JV. Boy, you see you contributing, baby, because I don't know who else knew that quote. So thank you for being here, JV, and throwing that into this pot of gumbo that we have and up and through here. Okay, Lord have mercy. And
I just wanted to.
yeah, go ahead, brother Muko.
I just want to apologies. I did have a phone call,
It's
but
okay.
from everything that I've heard from the start, and so my phone call definitely 100%. Thank you for this, please. I think this is just more evidence that we need to definitely stay 10 times more focused on these white supremacists, because we already see how slipperyly dangerous they are, how they use these weapons of words that they have constructed to keep us in a victimized state, and to also keep them in the supreme mistreater state, in a mistreater's position. Right. So I appreciate you for definitely showing and just re-exposing these tactics that they use, and then we need to keep them in the forefront of our mind. Trouble made a lot of great points, such as JB as well. And it all boils down to, and it all comes back to us upgrading our thoughts, speech, and action.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? When we do these things, we definitely do see a reaction from racism, white supremacy. I know I have never seen racism, white supremacy as a system react to so many things that we're doing. I haven't seen that in my lifetime up until now.
Right.
So to me, that is good. But we got to keep the pressure on. You know what I'm saying? We got to keep 20 toes down, keep this pressure on. And thank you for the space. And I'll just land there.
Thank you, Brother Muko. And, and that pressure is applied in many different ways. Some people really don't know because they haven't bothered to look, so they're just going with what they're being told. And that's helped this strategy of the suspected white supremacy. That's helped them to advance with people just saying, I don't want to see. There is no color. I don't see color. That's why the subtitle of the book is Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colored Blindness. I don't see color. So you don't see color. You don't see history. You don't see nothing. And that's why you can't see what the hell is going on. So here's what's up, y'all. My YouTube channel's in the Jumbotron. Please subscribe. I'm not going to get rich. If you subscribe to my YouTube today, I'm not going to get rich tomorrow. But we might get somebody that'll come in and contribute richly, okay, to the discussion. That's what we're looking for. So if you like me and you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And just to let you know, we talked about it when me and Brother Muko was in this space alone at the beginning, and all we heard was echoes. Me and Brother Muko in the space, and me and Tatiana on the YouTube streets. Hey, we're going to be doing this on Sundays. It's easier. It's more consistent. So Sundays at 11 is when we're going to do this book discussion on Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colored Blindness. I appreciate everybody, and that's how Trouble says everybody. Everybody. I appreciate everybody pulling up to the space today and sharing some thoughts and contributing to the conversation, because, boy, I'm telling you, I learned something. Okay, this book is off the chain, so if you have it, get it. If you don't have it, get it. And if there's no other thoughts, y'all, we gonna get on up out of here. Any last words? Anybody else?
I got one last word
yes, sir.
For the space. Man, keep your eyes open. We are approaching the 4th of July. White supremacists lie. They do it so perfectly. We just had a mass shooting up here in Baltimore last night. Over 30 people injured, 2 people dead, 2 in critical condition. I just want us to be very, very, just alert.
Yes, vigilant.
And
vigilant.
Understand, very vigilant, and understand that we are the food. Okay, we are food. They are selling our black bodies. They are trafficking our organs, and this is not just some. I mean, we just got a case from Harvard. Guy was just arrested 4 or 5 days ago. Funeral director, white lady, was just sentenced to 20 petty years for selling 520 quarts. Okay, parts.
Yeah.
All that. 20 years. You know, the director from Harvard, 10 years.
Yeah.
And then you know, I put up in the I didn't put it in the jumbotron, but if you the time that they get for this crime, if you're caught trafficking a body, do anyone in this space only know that you get 1 to 3 years for that?
Wow. No, I didn't
1
know
to 3
that.
years.
Wow.
I don't think that that's enough. I think it's put there strategically because we are the hunted. And so, you know, we got a lot of people. We got over 10,000 people go missing in Baltimore a year. DC is even higher, and I'm sure in y'all areas it's a little higher or a little lower.
Sure.
But the thing is, these cases are never solved, and it just goes swept under the rug. America survives off of dead black bodies. We have to be more vigilant. And I'll land there.
Oh, wow. America survives off of dead black bodies and incarcerated black bodies. Coach, you know what? Thank you for pulling up here because I heard you in another space and you said something. I said, Coach even said it. Jim Crow is still alive and kicking. Unmute your mic, Coach. What's T? Thanks for pulling up. What's going on?
Peace, power, love, delineation, reparations, immigration, deportation to the progeny of the Black American Negro, Cruz, and ethnic lineage people groups, the innovators, architects, and founders of pre and post USA. We got to get out of this color thing. We got people since the 1965 Hart-Celler Immigration Nationality Act look just like us, similarly, dress like us, try to talk like us. A lot of our people of our ethnic lineage haven't caught on yet. But in order to kidnap our kids, because our kids ain't going with no troglodyte Neanderthals into the U.S. Census classified as white European mafia peasant criminals. They going with people that look like them. Out in St. Louis in April of 2021, there were some school-age children about to be kidnapped in a white van by some Africans.
Coach.
So we got to cut this color shit out. Listen, I give Neely full of credit for what he's contributed, but I'm not building a shrine around what he said because we have two separate fights on our respective land masses. We've been fighting these troglodyte Neanderthals into the U.S. Census classified as white European mafia peasant criminals on our ancestors' soil. They've been fighting people that look like them for centuries. We got two separate fights.
Right.
We're the only people that move based off of phenotype, skin complexion in the entire globe. Because we're all on each other's family trees. When we really do these trees and branches, we gonna find. I found people on social media that I've met in person that's on my family tree. Paternal and paternal side. All over the country. We are all on each other's family trees. Period. We are not African. And I put a link in the chat to Dr. Shirley Weber, who introduced AB 3121 in California Reparations Task Force. And I put the time limit that she speaks to those who still want to practice this Caribbean Pan-African ideology. Because it came from Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was a Caribbean, came to Rutgers University and was denied access. And then he went to London and became a journalist, and he did work on the continent of Africa. It didn't come from Garvey. Garvey never even went to Africa. So we dispelling and debunking a lot of untruths. And our ancestors are helping us do it. They've always done it. They've used our bodies, our mouths, our intellect, our ingenuity, our creativity, and our courage. Because we are our ancestors. We got home soil advantage. And we doing this forensic work. Start with your own family tree first. It's going to connect you to the soil or it's not. I speak my piece.
Right on. Well, yeah, it's damn near a mic drop, Coach. Y'all, that's it. That's the podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Replay gang, leave a comment. You know I want to hear from you. mark your calendars, y'all. We're going to be doing this on Sundays, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We'll be live on YouTube, live on the Twitter Spaces. Get the book or don't, but just get in here, okay? And let's chop this up. Until next time, y'all, we will see ya when we see you. Welcome to the Only Male Cruz Show, the We Own Your Head podcast. Discussing topics that make you say, how and where can we improve as a society? From a Black American's perspective. Copyright disclaimer regarding fair use is in full effect. The views and opinions expressed in this show, you guessed it, they're all mine. Catch us live, be ready to speak. This is a call-in show. Be sure to hit the like button, share, subscribe, replay gang, leave a comment. You know I want to hear from you. Let's go to work.